All right, so my name's Emile. I know some of you guys that don't, but anyway, I'm a rep for Watts. I'm also a rep for State and A.O. Smith water heaters. So supposedly that makes me smart enough to talk about thermal expansion. Does everybody here know what thermal expansion is? All right, good. So that's why I'm here. All right, so what is thermal expansion? Well, for the most part, thermal expansion is, an easy way to say it is, as you heat water, whether in a water heater or a boiler or a tankless, whatever, you raise the pressure of the water inside the tank. And so that water has to go somewhere, or that pressure has to go somewhere. So today, if you got a gas water heater in someone's house, and as you heat the water, you're increasing the pressure in the tank. And so what happens as pressure builds, we got a T&P valve. As pressure builds, water will either make the T&P valve, or should make the T&P valve open and go out, okay? But if there's some issue with the T&P valve, then we need to have what we call some sort of thermal expansion device. Now there's two different types of thermal expansion devices. The first one is an expansion tank, all right? Which an expansion tank kind of looks pretty much, it's kind of a rounded little tank, and it'll typically have a little Schrader valve there on the bottom of it, okay? We also make ball valves that have a thermal expansion device on them, and there's a little spring inside there that allows the pressure to relieve. So how does it all work? All right, so this is a basic water heater, okay? Gas water heater, we got a flame here, we got a T&P valve here, and we have a expansion tank put on the line here. We typically always put the expansion tank on the cold side. You don't have to, but you should put the expansion tank on the cold side. What the expansion tank does is, it allows, as the pressure builds in here, okay? And if we have, and almost everything we're talking about today is gonna have to do with a system that has a check valve in it or a closed loop system. Does everybody know pretty much what a closed loop system is? It's got a check valve in it, it can't go anywhere, it can't go back into where it came from. So if you go, so let me just kind of finish up here. So this is sort of what a regular installation would look like. Water heater, expansion tank on the cold side. One thing you got to know about an expansion tank, when you take an expansion tank out of the box, whether it's a Watts brand or any other brand, chances are it's only charged to 40 PSI. Always read, there should be some sort of tag in the box or on the expansion tank itself. Always read to see what it's charged to. Reason being is you always want the expansion tank to be charged to the incoming water pressure. So if your water pressure is 60 PSI, you want to charge that tank to 60 PSI. So how do you do that? Well, basically it's got just a Schrader valve on it, just like your car or a bicycle. So all you need is maybe a fancy churning pump, all right, since I'm the churning rep, or a bicycle pump, all right, and you just plug it up to a Schrader valve on the bottom of it, pump it up to 60 PSI, 55 PSI, whatever the incoming water pressure is. All right, so what does that do? So it's basically a bladder tank that allows, as that water pressure builds, and say we have a backflow or a check valve somewhere down the line here, as that pressure builds, it's got to go somewhere. So if we don't have the expansion tank, it's going to come out of the T&P valve, right? We don't necessarily want that happening, but that's what the T&P valve is for. So if we have the expansion tank and we have it charged at the right pressure, that pressure will back up into the expansion tank. And just some common case scenarios where I see this all the time. So say the municipality or the neighborhood association decides to put a backflow somewhere on a neighborhood or an apartment complex. What happens? Well, you get a call, it's just saying my water heater's leaking, or that device on the side of my water heater's leaking. So you go out there and look at it, and you're like, sure enough, there's water coming out of it. Or I'll give you even a better case scenario. Lady calls and says my water heater's leaking. So you go out there and change the water heater, all right? Put a new water heater in. 2 days later, she calls you back and says, that little device on the side of my water heater is leaking now. That little brass valve or whatever they want to call it is leaking. So you go out there and you're thinking, well, I guess it's got some reason I must have a brand X water heater with a bad T&P valve on it. You change that T&P valve. You get the same call 2 days later. Well, that brass valve is still leaking. You should know right then it's not the T&P valve. I have some sort of thermal expansion going on somewhere. There must be a closed loop, there must be a check valve in the system somewhere, and I need to put an expansion tank or an expansion valve. Okay? And so what happened in that scenario probably is someone came in and put a check valve on the line somewhere, And that water heater itself was probably older, right? And as that pressure would build, or that you get hotter and the pressure would build inside that tank, it wouldn't go anywhere, because in a lot of cases that TNP valve over the years will get clogged up with calcium and scale and all that kind of stuff, and it doesn't operate like it's supposed to, because most of the time as a manufacturer we tell you you should trip them once a year, open them up. But most people are scared to open them up because they say the debris gets in there and they never seat right. But the fact is you should open them up just to keep them working right, okay? So in that case, this thing was probably clogged up. We had a check valve in the system out, and so that pressure was building inside the tank, right, and didn't have anywhere to go, so it just made the tank burst, or it made the tank get a hole in it, so it starts weeping. So now you come in with a brand new one where the TNP valve was working correctly, right, and the TNP valve is doing what it's supposed to do, instead of the old one where it's corroded up, now it's opening up, letting some of that pressure go out. So anytime you have a TNP valve leaking, the first thing I would start checking is thermal expansion. I wouldn't automatically assume it's the TNP valve. Chances are it's not the TNP valve. Chances are it's something affecting the TNP valve, and the TNP valve is doing what it's supposed to do. Okay? So anyway, so you come in and put an expansion tank on that heat. You realize that, okay, so I got a thermal expansion problem. There's a check valve somewhere. You're going to put an expansion tank on there. First thing you do is check the incoming water pressure. Right, see what the water pressure is, and then you charge your TNP valve. You charge your expansion tank to that temperature or that pressure, and then you just put it on the cold water line. Okay. Something else you can do that I've seen with Watts, we have a gauge called a lazy arm gauge. Okay, so it's got two arms on it. The first one will always push the second one around, and it'll stop at the highest point. So because a lot of times you're going to get thermal expansion at night, because no one's using water. No one in the neighborhood, everybody's sleeping, nobody's drawing any water off the system. So at that point, that's when the pressure will build up to the highest. So you can put this lazy arm gauge on a hose bib. You just screw it on to a hose bib and then turn the water on, leave it and let it go overnight. You can come back. I've seen it go as much as high as 120 PSI before at night. In some neighborhoods, this was in North Louisiana, but anyway, we put it on there one morning, went back the next morning, and as the first arm pushes the second arm around, the second arm will stop at the highest point. This one will fall down. We could tell that the pressure got to 120 PSI at night, which is way too much, right? The heater's only rated for 80 PSI, so anything over that is not good for the water heater. Okay. So everybody understands what a check valve is. A backflow would be a check valve. Today we're putting backflows in a lot more places, which is a good thing, because again, I'm the Watts rep. I love to sell Watts backflows. All right. So anyway, backflows are check valves, and also if you have a recirc line. Okay, so if you have a recirc line, chances are you're going to have check valves on that as well. So if you have a large house, right? Everybody knows what a recirc line is. We want to get hot water coming at the faucet almost immediately, so we have this fancy recirc line in there. Well, typically when you have a recirc line, you're going to have check valves in that line to keep that water from going backwards or the way it's not supposed to be going. So those are the things you should be looking for. Recirc lines, any check valve, and backflow preventers. That's what's going to cause, or that's what's going to be one of the biggest causes for the thermal expansion. Okay? Any questions about that so far? Nothing? I explained it that good? All right, that's really about, in terms of thermal expansion, there is a lot of formulas that will tell you how hot, between the heat of the water and the pressure, what you're building to. But the main thing we're looking for is this TNP valve opening? If it's opening, we got to figure out why it's opening. Okay?
How do we know what size expansion tank to put on?
Good question. So for the most part, for a residential heater, if it's a 50-gallon heater, we have a Watts PLT5, which is about a 2.2 gallon expansion tank. But if you're getting anything larger than that, you can go to Watts has a online sizing thing. You just put in the BTUs, I think and the gallons of the water heater, and it'll spit out what size expansion tank you need. And not just Watts. To be fair to everybody, some of the other expansion tank manufacturers have that same online calculator.
Can you explain in a diagram in relation to the check valve where the expansion tank needs to be installed?
All right, great point, Travis. Okay, so anytime you're putting an expansion tank on a water heater, and you have a ball valve here to shut the water off, right, coming to the water heater, you always want the expansion tank on the water heater side of the ball valve, because you don't want someone to come in and say they're going out of town and they don't, for whatever reason, they don't want the water from the water heater going to the house or something like that. You don't want them to shut the ball valve off and the ball valve be on this side, and then the expansion tank is essentially taken out of the loop, right? So anytime you have a ball valve or any sort of shut off valve, you always want it on the house side of the expansion tank instead of the water heater side of the expansion tank. Okay? Because otherwise it's useless.
Same thing with a recirculating line, it's gonna come tie back into the cold side right there in the heater, where you're gonna put a check valve on the cold side of where that recirc ties in to keep that hot water from going into the cold system. So you need to make sure you always stay between the check valve and the water heater where you use from the expansion tank. And it's the same thing as the ball valve, you know, you don't put it cold water side of the ball valve when the check valve is taking it out of the heat.
So you make the connection between the expansion tank and the water heater.
Between the check valve, yeah, the check valve.
With the check valve.
You can draw it out. Check it out.
You're the plumber.
So if your cold comes in right here, this is your cold line. Say this is your water heater right here. Ties in. Your hot leaves. Your hot comes back around, ties into your cold. You're gonna have a check valve right here. Okay? You're also gonna have maybe a ball valve right here. You wanna make sure your expansion tank is here. Not on the recirculating line coming back, but on the downstream side of the check. On the cold side.
Basically, you don't want
Expansion tank will go right there.
Basically, you don't want any valving between the expansion tank and the water heater.
That's right.
To make it simple, everything should be on the house side or the building side of the expansion tank. You don't want anything between here and here, okay? Anything between here and here basically cuts this thing out, and it's useless. Or not useless, but it's not doing what it's supposed to do, or potentially cannot do what it's supposed to do.
Does it matter if that tank's upside down or right?
It really doesn't. And honestly, if you had all this out of the way, you could have that thing somewhere else in the house. It doesn't necessarily have to be right next to it. Obviously, the best place for it to be is right next to it, because you don't want anything on this side of it. But no, it doesn't matter if it's upside down. I've seen them both ways, upside down. Only thing you want to be careful of, if you got a larger one, obviously, is how you're going to restrain it, right? So that's the only thing you want to be cognizant of. Most of the time in the residential, it's not a big deal. But in the commercial, I mean, look, in the commercial, we have up to 30-gallon ones. Okay, you got this big, huge high-rise apartment complex or something like that, or a big commercial building. So yeah. So to answer your question, no, it can be upside down, it can be right side up. The biggest thing you're worried about is how am I going to support it? And some of them are floor mounted. I think I saw one on y'all's warehouse, probably 20 or 30 gallons, floor mounted. Okay. Jimmy said I only have 15 minutes, so I'm not sure how I'm doing. Any questions about it? I know I kind of went over it pretty fast, but look, let me tell you something. T&P valves and their function are extremely important. I tried to download this video, but I couldn't get it this morning to show you guys. Never try to alter a T&P valve. Never plug a T&P valve. I've seen videos of where plumbers have plugged T&P valves. My favorite story is this real smart guy from Alabama, who everybody in here knows Alabama people ain't that smart anyway, but he plugged, it was a maintenance guy at a school. He plugged a T&P valve. It blew. Thank goodness that when it blew, it was at night and kids weren't in school, because it damn near blew the whole cafeteria down. All right. So these things are, and you can go online and look at it. Watts has this great video. I think Mythbusters actually did something on it a couple years ago. They would plug the T&P valve purposely and then heat the water in. Okay. So as that water is heating, that's when you're building the pressure, right? If that pressure doesn't have anywhere to go, that water heater becomes a bomb or a rocket. I'm talking, they shoot 40, 50 feet in the air. They can destroy. On that Watts video, it actually shows them destroying houses. Okay, so it's always be cognizant. A leaking T&P valve, you want to figure out why it's leaking. Is it thermal expansion? Is it something wrong with the valve? Figure it out before you just change it, and absolutely never plug a T&P valve. That would not be good for you or the people in that building.
We had jeans that worked for us to plug one here 5 the next morning.
He should have been. He should have been. That's an extreme no-no. Okay. All right. Any questions about thermal expansion? How does it happen? It happens when you heat water. Okay. As water is heated, it expands.
On the gauge situation, can we use a regular gauge or do we have to use a special gauge?
Well, the reason I talk about that lazy arm gauge is you're going to have to leave it. Okay. Chances are, I mean, you could probably put a gauge on there, drain the water heater, or run all the hot water out and let it heat. And as it's heating, it'll build pressure. But I think that at night is the best time to get the highest pressure that you're going to get out of that system. And so that, just put on a hose bib outside. You can put on a hose bib anywhere in the house, but that's just an easy way to do it because that whole system will pressure. Like I said, at night when no one in the neighborhood is using any water, right, that's when the pressure is going to be at its highest. And as those water heaters typically probably are going to cycle at least some point during the night, unless it's South Louisiana and midsummer and it's so hot in the attic that it really doesn't need to. But for the most part, they're gonna cycle at night, and so while that thing is cycling, while it's heating, and then with the pressure being the largest because no one's using any, and the heating of the water heater, that's when you're probably going to see your highest peak of pressure for that system.
So we're gonna get a gauge in case we need one.
Yeah.
I'll send you one.
We got one.
You got some? And if not, I'll send you one. That's no big deal. Okay. Any other questions? I know it seems elementary, but man, you'd be surprised at how many times I get a call, somebody saying, man, this damn heater, I've already changed 2 or 3 TMP valves on it, and it keeps leaking. Well, that's not the water heater's fault. It's just doing what it's supposed to do.
You're talking about check valve on the water system.
Yes.
99% of every water meter installed now comes with check valve.
That's why it's important. That's why we're in here talking about it now, because you're seeing more and more check valves on systems.
In the city, they water check valve.
Yeah. And I want to say, Travis, help me with this. I want to say local code says if you have a closed loop system, you have to have an expansion device on it. And so if what you're saying that 90% or 80%, whatever number you use, then we should be putting expansion tanks on. Right. Any house or building, let me not say house, any building that has a closed loop system is by code is supposed to have an expansion device on it of some type. The expansion tank is probably the best way. Like I started to say earlier, we have an expansion valve. Watts makes one, several other manufacturers make one. It's basically a ball valve. It has a spring in it. That spring is dialed into certain pressures, right? So it'll open, and it's got a port on the bottom of it that'll just drain the water out if the pressure gets too high. Okay. The only negative about those is you're always putting water out. So anytime there's a thermal expansion happens and the pressure builds too much, and that water, instead of going into the tank, right, just leaks out of this valve and it goes somewhere. So now you have to run a drain line for it. So they're great. They work great. They do what they're supposed to do. But in my opinion, if you can put a expansion tank on there, that's a better system. You'd have to ask the local code guys that, because I get different answers. In my opinion, you should be able to go in with a TMP valve, but I don't think you can. I think that TMP valve for Louisiana code anyway has to be dedicated to just that TMP valve. I don't think you can mess with that. Maybe into the drain line, pan line. Maybe I'm not a code guy with that. So
You can tie it into a trap, but you want to run it to a visible location, just like the relief. That way you do what you got to do. If you just run into a trap, it just sit up there and run.
Like an open
And your water heater going to sit there and keep heating water, as it's draining out. So you want to
just one last thing.
It had to be an open hub drain.
Yeah, one last thing for me to tell. I keep saying closed loop system. Everybody understands what a closed loop system is, right? That's okay. It's going to have a check valve on it, or a backflow on it, or something where the water can't go backwards into the city. I mean, the whole idea with a backflow is we don't want to allow water coming from the house going back into the city water that could potentially contaminate city water. So that's why one of the reasons we put backflows on houses. Okay. Hey, any questions about that at all? Everybody's now a thermal expansion expert. When you guys are doing bids for water heaters, I'd find out if they have a check valve on the system, that should go in our bid.
What about new construction? Shouldn't every house have one now?
Like I said, technically by code, if it's got a, and there are areas of the country where it is that they have to.
Don't the meters have a little check valve on now at the water meter?
I think the majority of them do. That's right. That's right.
For a couple bids.
That's right.
Oh, yeah. How much does the expansion tank cost? $5 just for a basic small well.
For residential, look, and they're nothing to install. I mean, the only thing I'd recommend when you install them is put a union in there. So if for whatever reason it needed to be changed at some point,
Would I put water hammer into in-house?
it could potentially. I mean, hammer rester is going to be the best thing for water hammer, right? But it could help a little bit. Okay.
When you set it, how long does that take to actually put the air in the thing?
Oh, just like pumping up a bicycle. Just as long as you.
They come preset, most of them.
Well, they come preset to 40 psi, right?
60, right? Needs 60 on the tank.
So if the incoming water pressure is 60, then the tank needs to be charged to 60. If the incoming water pressure is 55, it needs to be charged to 55. But they do come preset at 40. And that's a major. In fact, Jimmy and I were talking about this earlier. He didn't realize that that you must charge the expansion tank to the incoming water pressure for it to operate properly.
Never done that. Never knew.
You're not in a minority there. I mean, that's probably the majority, okay? Because a lot of guys don't either, for whatever reason, didn't read the directions or just was in a hurry and just assumed. Because they do say pre-charge, and I think that's sort of a misnomer on our part, because when you read something on the box, I think it says pre-charge, but it's pre-charged to 40 psi and not, we don't know what everybody's water pressure is. It could be, it's all over the board. You go.
What happens if it's 40 and you don't pump it up?
So there's a bladder in there, right? So it's pushing back and kind of all working together. So basically, it's just not going to work right. So you may still get something leaking out of the TMP valve because it's not working like it's supposed to. Okay.
You have to wait till after dark and all that, when nothing's going on, get the correct pressure then coming in, right?
No, not really. I mean, if it's off a psi or two, that's not going to be too big a deal. But typically, you want to do it during the day stuff.
You get about 50 during the day, 50 pounds, but at night you probably won't get 70, 85.
Yeah.
That's a difference. That's quite a bit of difference.
That's you're right. But
At LSU, when I worked at LSU, that pressure jumped way high at night.
and that's why I talk about putting that lazy arm valve on there if you think pressure is a big deal. Because look, the homeowner's going to tell you a big part for you guys as service guys. You're going in, you're changing. Maybe you're fixing that water heater that I was talking about earlier, where the TMP valve corroded, and they put a check valve. They put a new water meter in. All right, that water meter's got a check valve in it, so that tank ended up rupturing because of the pressure that kept building up in it, and the TMP valve wasn't working. So you, as a service guy, you got to go in there and tell the homeowner, "Hey, I'm gonna sell you the water heater, right? I'm gonna change that for you, but I'm also gonna put this other thing on there called an expansion tank." And they're gonna say, "Well, I didn't have that on my last one," right? And then you can tell them, "Well, that's why your last one leaked, because you didn't have it on the last one. If you put this on there, it can, first of all, it's code. Second of all, it can actually help the heater from leaking because it won't have to absorb so much of that pressure." Okay?
So,
Any questions?
yeah, what happens if it is getting to 100 pounds, 100 psi at night, and what do you set your expansion tank
If it gets to 100 psi at night, now we're going to start looking at another fabulous White's item called a PRV, or pressure reducing valve, right? Because we got to get that pressure down to somewhere below 80 at all times. So 80 is the max. All right.
So when you put that lazy arm on, and you see that's what you do.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That's going to tell us. In most cases, in around the Baton Rouge area, I haven't seen anything over 100 psi or even 80 psi because we've got so much construction and all that, and people are new houses everywhere and all that. But anyway, if you get too high of a pressure, that's when we got to look at a PRV, or pressure reducing valve. Okay. All right. Any other questions? That's it. I've knowledged y'all up that quickly. All right. Cool.
Testable.
Jimmy told me no door prizes.
Oh, man. Let's go, y'all.
I was gonna bring this fancy watch, shirt, and a little golf cart and all that for door prizes. Jimmy said no door prizes. So.